Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for joining me tonight. I think we've streamed like 3 nights in a row. It's practically rivaling Owen on a slow afternoon for him. Tonight I'm going to fulfill a request that was made both on Social Galactic and on the Darkstream, and I'm going to explain what usury is, what usury is not, and why student loans are not only wicked, evil, unbiblical, and anti-Christian, but are also dangerous from a secular economic perspective and intrinsically problematic. So this is maybe going to be a little bit of a slow one if you're not into economics or politics, but c'est la vie. We did sports last night, it seems fair. So many people, including myself in the not so recent past, have always assumed that usury was any loan in which interest was involved. And I think that that's partly a confusion with the Islamic notion of what is legal debt and what is not, or legal loan and what is not. But more importantly, I think that the concept has been intentionally adulterated and watered down in an attempt to confuse the descendants of Christendom so that they don't really understand what it is, why it was banned, or how the relaxations on the laws prohibiting usury have essentially destroyed the West, or at the very least rendered it susceptible to destruction. If you read Marie Rothbard's epic history of economic thought, which is well worth reading if you are at all into these sorts of things, you could literally summarize it as a history of the legalization of usury. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on for literally hundreds of pages about how various authorities in Europe, in the church, and elsewhere kept gradually making exceptions to the rules banning usury until it got to the point where everyone accepted it, and finally it's become so inverted. And I know that some of you watching this have this point of view, but I want you to really think about it. Don't react emotionally to it. Don't feel criticized or anything because you were indoctrinated. But the whole idea of you have a moral obligation to repay any debt, no matter how much unreasonable interest and so forth is attached to it, is totally and utterly false. Totally and utterly false. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But so the most important thing to understand is that what makes a loan usurious and what usury actually means is it's the translation of a Latin term that was mutuum, M-U-T-U-U-M. And a loan that was based on mutuum was distinguished from a loan that was called census. And the fundamental difference between the two had nothing to do with interest. It didn't even have to do with the rate of interest. What it had to do with is the collateral. So when you're thinking about debt, when you're thinking about credit, when you think about loans, and in the context of usury, what determines whether a loan is usurious or not is what the collateral is. So for example, what is the collateral if you take out a student loan? Can anyone answer that question? What is the guarantee offered on a student loan? There's already 26 people watching, so I'm pretty sure someone should at least have a reasonable answer. With this many people, I'm sure there's at least somebody who's got a student loan, so you should know. And then I'll ask another question. What is the collateral when you purchase a house? With a home mortgage. What is the collateral for a home mortgage? Veritas says you are the collateral. That's not correct. You are not the collateral. They can't put you in jail. They can't turn you into a slave. So you're obviously not the collateral. Q1882's answer is me in the workforce. Pointing in the right direction, but still not correct. Lunatic farmer is closer to the point, your labor. That is essentially correct, although keep moving bear would also be correct when he says nothing. There is no actual collateral. But you are responsible. So that's where the confusion is. You are responsible for the debt, but there is no collateral. There's literally nothing you can give them to settle the debt other than money. So the imagined, your personal guarantee, that's not collateral. You give a personal guarantee in the absence of collateral. And this is very important because that's precisely how you know the loan is usurious. Usury takes place when something is given for nothing. See, what a loan really is, and it becomes more and more clear when you see these census contracts, is it's essentially a time-delayed payment, a time-delayed purchase, if you don't give the money back. So Austin says, with a home mortgage, the bank keeps the house. Yes, but it's more than that. If the bank only took the house, then there would be no usury. But the reality is that the loans are written in such a way that there is incomplete collateral. And so typically when you take out a home mortgage, the house is collateral, but you have to give a personal guarantee as well. And so therein lies the problem. What's supposed to account for it, if in a non-usurious census style contract, the house would just be the collateral and you'd make a down payment to reduce the price. Veritas says you're on the hook for the balance if the loan is underwater, same with a car loan. Exactly. So that's why those loans are not legitimate, they're not moral, and they do qualify as usury. And it's really clarifying to see this because it also demonstrates why a corporate or a government bond are not usurious. Why? Because there is actual collateral. There is a thing that you can claim if the borrower defaults. Typically with a bond, corporate or government, you get stock ownership. So now in the case of a corporate default, that might not be worth anything. But at no point is anyone responsible for it. At no point is there a personal guarantee of any kind. So when they're talking about usury and they start talking about interest, then you know that you're either dealing with someone who doesn't understand the concept or someone who is trying to deceive you about the concept. And it's pretty clear if you look at the definition in the dictionary, because the definition in the dictionary doesn't make any sense. One of the definitions provided by the American Heritage Dictionary says that usury is the payment or receipt of interest on a loan, which would mean that you're the usurer if you are borrowing the money and paying back the interest. That's nonsense. And in fact, it's directly opposite to the Catholic teaching, which was the legal teaching back in the day. Thomas Aquinas specifically addresses the question in the Summa Theologica. He's asked, is usury a sin? Which it is. But then he says, is it a sin to be the borrower on a usurious loan? And he answers, no, you cannot be, you're the victim. You cannot be guilty of usury by being the borrower in a usurious loan any more than you can be guilty of murder by being the murder victim. And so the second definition that was offered was too high or exorbitant interest. Well, what is too high? What is exorbitant? Why would a smaller rate of interest be acceptable when they have the possibility of still coming after the person because there is no collateral? The rate doesn't matter. Interestingly enough, the Encyclopedia Britannica 1911 edition, when it discusses usury, it talks about how Solon, the great Athenian statesman, solved the problem of a small number of plutocrats owning everybody's land through a series of usurious loans. And they'd essentially managed to take over all the land, all the property from everybody else, thereby rendering the entire Athenian state totally unstable. Solon stepped in, declared all of the loans to be void, returned the land to everybody, and then set up an establishment that said basically you can only loan against collateral, and if you do borrow against your land, you are limited to the amount of land that you're able to put at risk. And he didn't put any limits on the interest rate. And what was fascinating about it was that for many, many years, for I think at least a century or two afterwards, they didn't have the same problems again. Because the problem is not in the interest rate. What do you care about an interest rate of 20% if the loan is going to enable you to make 50%? That's a good deal. It's not a problem. A loan of 2% that you can't repay is a problem. So there's nothing inherently evil or not evil about an interest rate per se. Now, of course, payment loans and credit card loans and all those things are predatory, they're evil, they're wrong. But the fact that they have a high interest rate is merely a attribute. It's not what makes those predatory loans wrong. Q1882 said, I paid off all of my student loans, but not being able to default on them seems criminal. Well, it's not criminal. It's absolutely legal, because what is legal or illegal does not mean that it is right or correct. It is absolutely immoral, it is absolutely sinful, and it is absolutely usurious. Austin says, in a fiat system with no collateral, would a loan taken by the borrower become usurious to the lender? No. That's not possible. You can't. The borrower cannot be usurious regardless of whether there's an implied negative rate from inflation. Again, rates don't matter. Rates don't factor into usury. It's about collateral for the loan. The lender always takes a risk of getting paid less or getting paid than he loaned, and always runs a risk of not getting paid at all. But again, the focus on interest is fundamentally deceptive. There's nothing to do with interest whatsoever. It has to do with collateral. If there is no collateral, if there's only partial collateral, and if a personal guarantee is involved in any way, shape, or form, that's what usury is, because usury is considered to be fundamentally a form of slavery. In the ancient literature and in some of the biblical literature, the two things are equated. And in fact, often people who ended up in slavery were enslaved by debt. That was the personal guarantee. It wasn't just their labor that was involved, it was their person. Which again is proof that a corporation is not a person. It may be a legal person, but it's not a person. It's just a thing. And there's also another sort of body of thought that's related. It's not conflicting, but it considers usury to be less a crime against the person, although it is, but it's also a form of fraud, because the loan is being provided for nothing. There's literally nothing on the other end. It's dishonest. It's all pretend. Now, people sometimes like to bring in the fact of money being fake and credit money and fiat money and all this sort of thing. That's not relevant. That's not saying that those things are acceptable. That's not saying those things are good, but it's saying they're not relevant to the concept of usury, except in that sometimes there is some level of debt involved. And if you're talking about credit money, where the money is invented from nothing, and then there's a personal guarantee on the end, obviously that is intrinsically usurious. And so I think this is going to be important for some of you to keep in mind, because as the economy gets difficult, most of you, I'm sure, are relatively responsible, financially successful individuals, more so than some of the people around you, more so than some of your social circles, friends and family, etc. And so as times get difficult, people are going to be coming to you for support. They're going to be coming to you for loans. They're going to be coming to you for charity. Now, charity is easy. You can just give it to them. But when it comes to loans, you need to keep these concepts straight, because you don't want to be doing wrong. You don't want to be literally sinning and taking wrongful advantage of people. Moon Landing is not understanding. Is he saying mortgage loans are usurious? Yes. But student loans aren't usurious? No. Student loans are the most usurious loans that exist, short of actually requiring people to become a slave if they don't repay their student loans. I mean, any of you who try to defend the forced repayment of student loans and who criticize students who don't repay their student loans or default on them or whatever are just flat out wrong. I don't care if you took out student loans and you repaid them. You too are a victim then. But the fact that you were a victim does not mean that you should cheer on the victimization of other innocent young people. And don't forget that for a contract to be valid, both parties have to fully understand the consequences. And I would argue that not 5% of the young people who take out student loans can reasonably be considered to be capable of consenting to what they're consenting to. And so remember, the important thing is that if you are asked for a loan, then you only do so against actual physical collateral. You know, it doesn't, and also that collateral should be proportional. You know, that's something that the banks like to do. They like to, and also not just banks, but you know, sometimes the IMF loves to do this. They give out loans that they know can't be repaid, and then they take the whole property. You know, it has to be proportional. If somebody's got land that's worth $100,000 and they want to borrow $10,000 from you, then let's say it's 10 acres, it's worth $100,000. If they want to borrow $10,000 from you, then they can put 1 acre as collateral. You cannot permit them to put the whole thing up. It doesn't matter that, oh, that adds to my security and this and that and the other thing, and I just really want to make sure it gets repaid. It doesn't matter. It's still wrong. What would a non-usurious home loan look like? It would be a loan where the only collateral for the loan would be the house itself. So if you don't repay the loan, if you go into default, then the house can be seized. You know, that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with that type of loan. I mean, there's other problems with home loans, obviously, because they drive the price of housing up. The more loans there are, the higher the prices go, the more loans become necessary, and so on and so on and so on. You know, until people can't afford them and then they crash. I mean, we're already at that point. I don't know if you saw the post that I put up recently, but I think we've got that here. Well, actually, here, I'll do this in a second. Okay, it says the American dream is over. According to real estate brokerage Redfin, 2023 was the least affordable year for home buying on record. To buy a median-priced home worth $1,806 with the median U.S. income $78,642. You would have had to spend a record 41.4% of your earnings on housing costs, up from 38.7% in 2022 and 31% in 2021, and probably like 12% back in 1960. To buy that same home without spending more than 30% of your income, a popular rule of thumb among personal finance experts, you would need an annual salary of $109,868, which is $31,000 more, so 30% more than the typical household makes in a year. In other words, the entire U.S. economic system is broken with regards to housing, which is inevitable. There's a reason why you keep reading about jubilees in ancient history, or why you keep reading about collapses, economic collapses in modern history, is because once the debt spiral begins, a crash is inevitable. We're so far into the crash zone, it's not even funny. It's much worse than it was in 2008. Yordaman says, does knowing there's no realistic possibility of the loan being repaid automatically amount to usury? No. If it were to amount to anything, it would amount to theft. But even, no, it's not, that's not theft. Not at all, no. Because then all that means is it automatically amounts to a purchase. A loan should look like a purchase. What is the difference between I loan you $10,000 against an acre of your land worth $10,000? You don't repay the loan, and I claim the acre. What's the difference between that and me just paying you 10 grand for the acre? Nothing. The only difference is if you've been paying some interest on it. So maybe you're paying interest for 2 years and then you default. So then he gets the land and he gets whatever small percentage of the loan that interest or loan that you pay back. Yordamon says, I suppose if they still have the money in the end, it doesn't matter if they have the money in the end or not. Even if they don't have the money, they spent it. You didn't. There's no element of the equation that depends upon the person taking out the loan doing something smart, reasonable, or wise with it. In fact, being a borrower, being in debt, is regarded as the consequence of a curse in the Bible. I just flat out do not deal in debt. I didn't have the same understanding that I did originally. Okay, he's got another question here. Would that not then make home loans usurious if you're loaning someone money to buy a house, if the house doesn't exist at the time of the loan? Yes, definitely. If they give you a home loan and the home doesn't exist yet, that's usury. There is no thing that is being held against it. The one thing that you could say, no, the value doesn't have to precisely match. For example, it would not be usurious. Actually, let me back up. If the land that you were going to, here's the thing. The correct answer to that question is there's not enough information. It might just be a really stupid loan. Like, if you say, give me 100 grand, loan me 100 grand, and I'm going to use it to buy a piece of land and build a house on it, and the land and the house will be your collateral, there's no usury involved there unless the personal guarantee is given. But it's a really stupid loan to give the person the money and without them, without them having the collateral. They don't own they don't own the land, they don't own the house, so they could walk off with your money and you've got nothing because the proposed collateral was not actually collateral at the time of the loan. So that's would they then be buying the labor, land, and materials? Well, that's what we were talking about. That's what the proposition was. Yeah, he said that's what I meant by it doesn't exist. They haven't bought it yet. Right, they haven't bought it yet, so there is no collateral. So basically, you're giving them, if you're giving them the money and there's no personal guarantee, it's not usury, but it's also a really stupid loan because you've got no recourse. If they go to the casino and gamble it all away, you're out of luck. You can't take the land, you can't take the house, none of it exists. So, but again, it's not usurious because there is no there's no guarantee. You're just the lender is just out of luck. Could the effect of debt on the demand curve be mitigated by stopping fractional lending? No. Fractional lending is totally irrelevant. Your understanding of banking is outmoded by nearly 190 years. But that's what they still teach. What most people don't understand about banking is that the whole fractional lending thing is fake. Banks either borrow money from you. That's what a deposit is. They don't keep your money and then loan it out. They just borrow money from you. And by the way, that a deposit in a bank is precisely that sort of zero recourse loan that we're talking about, loaning somebody to build a house that doesn't exist yet. So when you loan money to the bank, it then becomes their money. That's why they can refuse to repay it to you. They just lose it, you become an unsecured creditor, and you go to the back of the line to get repaid when the bank fails. So you don't get anything. The way that they create money is they just literally make it up. They create, when you want to buy it, they essentially write down, we owe whatever. They put it in their balance, and boom, there you go. So the fractional lending has no impact on that because there's no connection between bank deposits and bank loans. So anyhow, I think that pretty much covers most of it. Does anyone have if anyone has any more questions about it, feel free to fire away. But otherwise, I hope that this has clarified your understanding of, well, actually now we've covered usury, bank loans, bank deposits. Not bad for 34 minutes. The thing is that a lot of these concepts don't, um, they don't make any, they're not difficult to understand. It's just difficult to get people to talk clearly about them. And it doesn't help that the textbooks and the stuff that they teach you in school is false. It's just flat out false. I mean, I remember they were still teaching in my college textbooks that banks had to keep a 10% fractional reserve at a time when the actual fractional reserve was 1%. There's no excuse for that. The textbook was published the year before. The fractional reserve was hadn't been 10% for like 3 decades. Q1882 says this would be a good Voxiversity if you decide to go that route again. Yeah, I'm definitely planning to, and thank you for the super chat. I think that we will do that. We've just got a little bit. Sidetracked with some of the other stuff that we've had to deal with. And Moon Landing gets it. I got it now. Student loans are usurious because there's no collateral and no option to default. Actually, it's just because there's no collateral. I mean, the no option to default doesn't make it usurious. That just makes it predatory. So it's both usurious and predatory. And honestly, it shouldn't even be legal. It shocks me that it demonstrates the falsehood, the falsity of contract law in the United States. They're just, it literally should not be possible to. Basically, they're saying you can sign a contract, but you have no option whatsoever to get out of it. I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. So, they actually, when they're teaching law students and stuff, they actually tend to make fun of the idea of, well, all you need to do is just say that you can never ever get out of this contract. Well, you can't do that. It's not legal, unless, of course, you get Congress to pass a law making that up out of thin air. So, Lunatic Farmer says, thanks for your post and this stream on the topic. Very helpful in clarifying the issues. Good. I'm glad. I mean, to be honest, the guy who put together that FAQ on usury really deserves all the credit, because all I did is read it and realize, okay, that explains why I was always dubious about the concept that usury meant interest. It was just flat out wrong. So, how important is actually owning a home? Not very. I'm young and debt is the only way we are told. Yeah, don't believe them. I didn't own a home from the age of about 30 until 53. Renting is usually better than owning. It's usually cheaper. And more importantly, and this is the most important thing, it gives you full flexibility. You can get out of a rental in 2 or 3 months. So it's not possible for you to completely screw up your financial future, by renting the way that you can by owning. Now, most people think about owning as intrinsically, a good investment or something, because house prices always go up. Why do house prices always go up? Because of debt. And like everything else, sure, it works great if you get in at the beginning of the debt bubble. If you're a boomer and you borrowed money to buy a inexpensive house and then it went up tenfold, 20-fold in value, of course you're going to think that everybody should buy a home. But buying a home when it's going to go up and the debt level is very low and that sort of thing is totally different. I mean, basically, it's like saying, is buying stocks a good investment? Yes, buying stocks is a very good investment if the market is low and goes up for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. Buying them is a very bad investment if you buy them at the top of the market. So, I mean, the question is fundamentally a category error. You know, given the way that the job market is, the uncertainties, et cetera, I think that most people are much, much better off to rent. You do the math. Just sit down and do the math. You're not saving the money. And also, you're putting yourself at risk because if the bank pulls the loan and you can't pay it off, then you're seriously screwed. What I would focus on more is, I mean, the important thing though, of course, is you have to save your money. You can't just spend it all when you're saving the money on renting. I mean, this is very difficult for young couples because, women tend not to understand very much about economics, and they just want to have their own home and feel like they own it and feel they can do whatever they want with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Honestly, the very best thing that you can do, and what everyone should do, is live with your parents, live with your families as long as you possibly can. Save your money. I mean, I've had this conversation recently with, with young people that I'm close to in one way or another, and it's very, very simple. I mean, you know the whole thing about the three generational thing. The first generation makes the money, the second generation spends the money, and the third generation, it's the rags to riches to rags again, right? Why does this happen? It's very, very simple. The first generation lives below its means. The first generation delays gratification, saves money, and has the excess of money that allows it to make the investments, buy properties, et cetera, and they build up a reserve, right? The second generation, they're not stupid completely, but what they don't understand is they don't understand how to make money. They don't know, they have no idea how to do it. To them, money is always there. It's for spending. And so they spend, and they're not necessarily totally foolish. They don't spend everything they have, but they don't delay gratification, and they don't they live up to their means. Maybe they live a little bit beyond it, but they live up to their means, which means that they don't create what the Marxists call the surplus value. They have no surplus value. They have no ability to build onto it. And this is entirely and absolutely normal. I'm very unusual in that I am a second generation wealthy individual who has always lived below my means. Some of my brothers, one yes, one not so much. And you can see the difference that it makes. And and then the third generation, of course, thinks they have more than they have and has no concept of how to, They don't. Not only do they not know how to make money, they don't know how to live within their means, and that's when, you know, all the extra surplus that was built up vanishes. And the thing that I would say to all of you who are in that second generation situation is, don't think that all the stuff you're thinking hasn't been thought before. Everybody thought that way. Everybody thinks that way. And that's why it always happens. I mean, think about all the great businessmen. How many of them had a second generation who actually performed even reasonably well compared to their father? I can think of one. Thomas Nelson Jr., IBM. He took his father's very successful IBM company and he turned it from a very successful company into a world dominating monster. And then after him, they blew it and handed over the computer business to Microsoft. Stark says the young millennial Gen Z cohort in America often cannot afford to live in the place they grew up. No, they can't. It's dreadful. Lunatic Farmer says the farm I'm on has done a 30x in value in less than 50 years. The land is only twice as productive because of home prices. Yeah, that's all debt. It's all inflated by debt, and it's going to have tragic consequences beyond what it's had already. Would the U.S. debt bubble popping be a kind of jubilee, assuming no capacity to repossess every home? No. No, it's not, because what it's going to do is the debt bubble popping is the problem that Solana was trying to solve, because their debt bubble had already popped and the plutocrats now owned all the property. I mean, how could you assume no capacity to repossess every home when that's exactly what would happen? The only people that it wouldn't affect at all are the people who own their homes outright. It wouldn't have affected me when I lived back there. We did borrow some money to buy our home initially, and I paid it off in 18 months because I gradually came to understand, this was just not a situation I wanted to be in for any reason. And we didn't buy. We did actually once arrange to buy a home over here, but then it didn't work out for esoteric legal reasons I won't bother you with. But we just decided, you know what? We will just find a nice place, rent it, and wait until we can pay cash for a house. And we waited a long time. It was particularly difficult here because the interest rates are so low that the amount of money that can be borrowed is just unbelievable. Because the debt service is very easy as long as the rates are low. Of course, guess what happens when the rates start going up? Then everybody gets in trouble. Nobody can service their debts. Everybody loses their houses. Maddie Ice says a friend worked for a mutual fund and all he did in '08 was buy houses any condition. Yeah, I mean there's the housing bros who have a tremendous amount of debt. And there was a video I saw where like these four guys were standing around talking, and somebody came up and asked them like what they did, and they're like, they kind of laughed, and they were definitely like projecting a vibe of kings of our world type of thing, and they were all pretty young, in their like mid-30s, and they were going around like one guy owned 50 houses, another one owned 250 houses, and the other guy owned like 3,000. And obviously, what they were doing was buying everything with debt and renting it out. Now, I have a friend who did pretty well with that for a while. Um, and you can do that right up until the uh, the interest rate exceeds the amount that you can charge for rent. And then the entire empire comes tumbling down. I mean, I can't stress how fragile debt makes a person or an individual. I have personally witnessed a $2 billion company vanish almost overnight. Do you remember? I don't know if any of you remember PSI Net. The reason that the name might sound vaguely familiar is they actually used to sponsor the Baltimore Ravens stadium. It was, PSI Net Stadium in Baltimore, and they just, they had grown through acquisition. That's why they had 2 billion in sales, because all the companies that they had borrowed money to buy. Then interest rates went up a bit. Overnight, whole thing had to be shut down. One of my best friends had to spend 2.5 years flying around the globe, everywhere from France to Australia, shutting down the various companies that they owned. It's crazy. What does US dollar debt bubble popping mean? It means that an excess number of corporations and individuals can no longer pay the interest on the debts they own and default. We are very, very close to that happening. I've talked to a number of people whose families are invested in office real estate, and they're all in trouble because the cost of the cost of just maintaining the office space plus paying the interest on the debt they own from buying the place is less than the amount that they're getting paid in rent. That's why if you look at the numbers, maybe somebody can look this up. Look up what the office vacancy rate is in 2024, and then look up the office vacancy rate back in 2008. And I bet you'll find that the office vacancy rate is higher now, probably much higher now, by like 10 or 15%, 10 or 15 points, than it was in 2008 in the middle of the financial crisis. It basically all it means is that nobody can pay their mortgage. When you can't pay your mortgage, you go into default, and then they take the house back, and all the not collateral, I'm spacing on the correct word, all the equity that you paid in is gone. Austin says the New York Fed chair is anticipating rate cuts by June. Yeah, that's nonsense, unless it's forced. They can't. The problem is that they can't lower the rates. They want to, but they can't. The really rich people are all sitting on cash right now, waiting for the prices to crash. So, anyhow, I do have one announcement to make before I go. I think this is kind of exciting. And what we have here is the first leather-bound stamped book produced at the bindery. It's not perfect. This is just the first test, but it's pretty exciting. That's the same green Cortina leather that we use for library. It's the Italian top grain, but if you notice, that's actually our first 2-color stamp. And this is a book that we're doing for the bindery's first client, and you can see up at the top and bottom that the gold stamping is not quite correct. There's some balancing and adjusting details to work out, but for those of you who have supported the bindery and who have been waiting to see us get it in operation, we are getting ever closer. Unfortunately, one of the problem machine broke again, so we're thinking about just replacing it altogether. We'll see, but yeah, that is the first leather-bound stamped book that has been created from scratch for one of our clients. And so we're not there yet, but we're getting there. So thanks for everybody's patience in that regard. And also, I believe you're probably aware that we announced the Illuminated Beowulf as the March-April Castalia Library and Libraria subscription book. So I don't know if you've subscribed yet. It's a free subscription to Castalia Library Substack. I highly recommend that, just because it's a good way for us to get the information out quickly to everybody. So anyhow, that's all I've got. So thank you for tuning in. Don't engage in usury. Keep yourself out of debt. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.